good morning on my behalf. I've done already quite a lot of conferences. Never in my whole life my name was mentioned so often in the first half an hour of the conference. I feel like the Director General today, so no, I know a bit how it is being the Director General today. I'm indeed since a couple of years working on plastics, and that is kind of the only thing that matters here. And I'll try to give you a little bit an overview of what we're up to and what we can't do at the moment. Andreas and the other speakers already mentioned a bit. There's a lot of research ongoing. There's still an enormous amount of research needed before certain actions can be taken. So I'll try to walk you through quickly. I'll focus a little bit on the legal perspective from the EU. I could give you many other kinds of overviews, but I know that the program is full with real experts, not with functionaries, that are much better placed to tell you something about that. Okay. So, this slide, not to tell you what you know already, but to tell you this is where we starting from. We have a definition of microplastics, which is relatively known. It's relatively straightforward. It is plastics smaller than 0.5 centimeter or 5 millimeters, whatever. We all know that microplastics are everywhere, that they remain in the environment, and that they accumulate. Because we continue using plastics everywhere. We know that they are transported by all kinds of means, and as a consequence that they are everywhere, but just everywhere. And the thing that I've not written up on here is until the placenta of humans, ladies, in the Antarctic on the top of the Mount Everest. They can transport and absorb other organic contaminants, as well non-organic contaminants, obviously. And because of all that, they impact our environment, proven, and they potentially impact our health, still question mark. There are early signs, not enough to say there's a huge threat on health, but enough early signs to act, in my personal view. So there's a rising public awareness, but a little bit less than on marine litter. We have worked on the directive on single-use plastics, which was about dealing plastics in the marine environment, and there the public support was overwhelming. Microplastics is a little bit less tangible, but still. There's still quite a lot of overwhelming support that came out of our public consultation. Andreas referred to that, and as well in the discussions that we're having with persons. I would like to come back very shortly to the bank account cards, the credit cards that we probably might be all eating every day. As long as that would pass the digestion system, there's no problem. As long as we don't know enough yet. So this is a plankton with the microplastic in there. What is our political mandate? It's always important when you work in one of the European institutions. Of course, there's a long history on plastics, and on plastic policies, but we think it all really kicked off to another level when we came out with the plastic strategy in 2018. There was a clear acknowledgement of the risks posed by microplastics, and it included already a couple of first actions that we were going to take. Continued that with 2 years later the Circular Economy Action Plan. It is important because this is the next commission, and the actual commission says bluntly, we will continue the actions as set out in the plastic strategy, and we will address microplastics, both intentionally added and unintentionally released. I guess in this kind of audience you all know intentionally added microplastics to products, or for instance the microplastics that you can find in detergents, in some cosmetics, and these are mostly dealt with in a REACH process, which is an incredibly long administrative process, and we hope to come out in a couple of months with a restriction of most of those microplastics added in products. As you all know, it will never be 100% those kind of processes, but a large majority will be banned from the market. And then we have to address intentionally released microplastics, which is much more the focus of today. What is quite important as well is the 2021 publication on zero pollution, and there we have the ambition, the target, to have a 30% reduction of microplastic releases by 2030 into the environment. Now, I gave you already a little bit the scene, but I want to say a couple of things here. You have microplastics coming just from three major sources. I only mentioned two for the moment. You have as well microplastics coming from the fragmentation of macroplastics. Now, as microplastics are so incredibly small, you should prevent them coming into the environment. Once they are in the environment, it's basically too late. We can clean up a little bit, and we're doing what we can, but it's basically too late. So when microplastics come in the environment, it's as well a bit too late. A bit less, but still. The first thing they have to do is to prevent macroplastics coming in the environment. We have our waste legislation that is helping there. We have the directive on single-use plastics, and I maybe should have added it as well. We have a lot of policies in the marine environment that are helping this as well. Then we have the two categories of microplastics that I already mentioned. One is the intentionally added microplastic to products. The fertilizers coating belongs to that one as well. And as I said, we're coming there to a reduction very soon, and we think this would count of about 500,000 tons over 20 years. 500,000 tons over 20 years. If we would very bluntly divide that by 20, it's about 25,000 tons a year. I don't remember how these calculations are done, but just suppose it's 25,000 tons a year. It's a lot, but you will see some figures later on. It's not a lot. Unintentional releases of microplastics are result from the use of a product, for instance, abrasion or fragmentation, but not the complete fragmentation as a microplastic. It's a little bit sometimes a blurred line, but you will see the examples and it becomes much clearer. And here we are heading towards legislation to reduce microplastic releases, but still a way to go. What do we have already? Well, we have a couple of pieces of legislation that are all looking at these microplastics. REACH is not up in here. I mentioned it already, but we have the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, the Water Framework Directive, the Groundwater Directive, the Environmental Quality Standards Directive, the Drinking Water Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. You hear it, it's all related with water. Kind of logic, because water is one of the main factors, one of the main media, where ultimately microplastics very often accumulate, and where you as well can measure them. Measure them in soil is possible as well, but it's way more complicated. We're not there yet. There are a couple of publications, but we're not there yet. All these directives, no regulation in here, all these directives aim now at the first step to monitor. Meaning, we need to measure first. There's a lot we don't know. We need to measure. There's no harmonized measuring methods. It will start with the Drinking Water Directive, very specific. We will go further, wastewater, sludge, and in the end we would like to know it in water bodies. Soil is for much further in time. This will just tell you what are the microplastic concentrations in that water. You can do some additional analysis of what is in there, but that is mostly not done. From research products, yes. So still more is needed. And that's why I would like to open a little intermezzo, which I thought was very interesting for this kind of audience, but in fact for any audience. These are two students, Elmo and Pablo. Those guys just finished their first 3 years at university, here in Brussels, 1 kilometer from here, to ULB, Université Libre de Bruxelles. And they decided to go for a Sabbath year, doing the tour of Europe, and at the same time measuring microplastics everywhere where they're going. They have raised funds to that. They're going to 24 countries, slide cut off a bit. They're doing 71 samples, which then will be analyzed by the CNRS. It's a very renowned French research institute, and which will help us to give a kind of thing. This is bottom-up science. This is still very much needed, and it's fantastic as well that the youth is engaging in that. But it as well shows that a lot still needs to be done. If you're interested, you have the link there. Those guys are now in Greece, ending their 6-7 month journey. Very nice block. So, what are the sources of unintentional release of microplastics? The 3 ones we know, they are in the title of this conference: tires, pellets, and textiles. And the textiles here is mostly meant clothes. There are many more textiles. Carpets, the textiles in the curtains, the seats in furniture, and so on. Those sources were known. Our study that we are doing right now has shown, it's not just a study, we became aware in the course of the study of a publication which became public a little bit more than 1 year ago on paints, which we have revised internally. We have some scientists inside the commission as well, as you know, in the Joint Research Center, in the Environmental Agency in Copenhagen, they looked at it as well, which shows that paints would be the major source of microplastics, of the unintentional release of microplastics. And it sounds a kind of logic once you think about it, because we paint all the buildings, not all, but many buildings outside. After a couple of years, those buildings need to be repainted. Where did that paint go? It did not go to a 5th dimension. Paint in average would count 37% of polymers, plastics. So it's a major source of microplastics. Geotextiles is another one. Unfortunately, the data on that is a complete disaster. We don't know enough about it, but so it needs to be looked, and very often those geotextiles are used for erosion control. When it's erosion control against the tides at the sea, it's clear that the abrasion rate will be high. Cannot be differently. And then we have a little smaller source, but still significant, which is these little films around the tablets that you would put in your dishwasher or in your washing machine, the plastic film around that. Those would be soluble and would biodegrade, and as I said, would. Apparently, they don't do that in a sufficient degree. Some of the figures, and I have put it on my slide, provisional underlined. We are revising these figures. These are not the final figures. Anyhow, they will never be the final figures, because by nature of the problem, it is extremely complicated, and you can see some of the ranges, for instance in textiles, how huge the range is. So paints, number one, almost 500,000 tons per year, tires close to it, pellets up to 200,000 tons a year, textiles, huge range, geotextiles, detergent capsules. The total emissions from these 6 sources between 800 and 1,800,000 tons, compared to the 25,000 tons we would save with REACH. you don't hear me saying that I don't want to have this REACH restriction. It is not the same, but we need to do more. It would be 90% of the total sources as we know today. I just would like to remind you that a bit more than 1 year ago, we were not aware that paints was such an important source. So we still don't know it all. What are the links with other regulatory initiatives, or what are the policies where some of these sources could be tackled? We could tackle paints in the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. I will share these slides afterwards, obviously, or the organizers will share the slides. But you can take as many pictures of me as you want. For tires, where we will talk a little bit more afterwards, we have Euro 7, where there are some provisions made. This is in the process of making. The intention is relatively simple. The worst tires, worse in terms of high abrasion of microplastics, should be taken off the market, and we should push for the better tires, better in the sense of less microplastic emissions. That will also be taken up by the tire labeling regulation. On textiles, we can look at the washing machines and washing dryers to put filters in there. Filters are not very cost effective today. We don't know what it will be in the future. And another main problem is, what do consumers do with the full filter? What I did until a couple of years ago was to clean it in the sink. Now, in the meanwhile, I know better, and I hope many of you know better, but I'm not sure that the average consumer knows better. If we need to go to a system where the filter needs to be a full filter, needs to be changed by a new filter, we're setting up a quite complicated system and costs will increase. So we need some more reflection on what is a good measure there. We have a textile strategy, we have a textile labeling regulation. We're looking at the revision of the Waste Framework Directive to see if we can do some things with EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, and modulated fees. And obviously, again, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation can take it up. The detergent capsules, there's a revision of the detergent regulation ongoing. There are no provisions on microplastics yet there, but there are some hooks where maybe it could be taken up at a later stage. And geotextiles can be taken up in the revision or through the revision of the construction products regulation. One that I did not mention is pellet loss. Pellet losses is a little bit a different one because all the previous ones, different swaps, this is a kind of the abrasion or the brittling of what's happening. I mean, a tire, you use a little bit of microplastics every time you use it. A pellet is a different thing. You lose it because of mishandling, because you don't take enough care during the process. Every time you handle, you need to take care. The solution is therefore as well relatively straightforward. Everybody who handles pellets needs to take care. Now, obviously, it sounds much more simple, and you can do it, but we're now in the process of seeing if we can look at producers, converters, logistics, including transports, how we can take care that people handling pallets do that better. We have a voluntary initiative, Operation Clean Sweep, which is helping, which is taken up primarily by producers, extremely little by the rest of the chain. And we're now looking if we can do something to make this kind of requirements that are in there to make them legally binding. And that's the process that we're going through. We have just executed an SME survey because in particular the converters and a big part of the logistics are SMEs. Now you all know the wind of times, SMEs need to be looked at with a double eye, which is normal. We are facing multiple crises. So we did this SME survey And out of the survey, it seems that those firms would accept mandatory measures if lighter requirements are there for SMEs. And we're now looking if and how that could be done. So my conclusion is relatively straightforward. There is a political commitment to take up microplastic solutions. On some things we can go a little bit faster, probably on pellets. On other things we will need more time. I should give you the example of paints, for instance. There's mineral paints, there's polymer paints. We could say, get rid of polymer paints and change it all for mineral paints. Unfortunately, we don't have the full environmental profile of those two paint families. And we cannot organize a shift from one to the other if it would mean that it would be a shift of burden. So it's clear that mineral paints would not have microplastic emissions, but they might have the double of greenhouse gas emissions. We simply don't know. So more analysis is needed on this kind of things. And such a kind of analysis you don't do on 2 or 3 months. You need a bit more time. We will go forward with the REACH restriction, and we're looking at all these microplastic emissions, and in particular pellets, to evaluate their benefits and potentially come out with a legal initiative and potentially as well with a communication. This is still under discussion, but it is the hope that it will still be possible to do that coming months, and if not, it will be for a little bit later, but we will continue all the work that is needed to tackle microplastic pollutions. Oops. Thank you.
Thank you, Werner Bosmans. I'm tempted to ask you whether you would be available for 1 or 2 questions, if there are any. Are there any questions? Yes, there is one. Keep your hand up, because the microphone has eyes, and then it finds you. Could you say who you are and where you come from?
But no ears.
Okay, now we made friends. Okay, good morning. My name is Christina Bogner. I'm a professor at the University of Cologne, and I'm part of the CRC on microplastics. The one initiative was which was mentioned in the beginning, and I'm a soil hydrologist. It makes me very sad when you say that soils are so far away in the future for the regulations of microplastics. I'm still curious, are there intentions to look at the soils, because we know that soils might contain a lot of microplastics, much more than some water bodies, and they have a very different degradation cycle once microplastics are in the soil. So is there any idea how to tackle this problem?
Not that I'm aware. Well, soil has the additional problem that there's a lot of subsidiarity. You might remember there were already several attempts to come with the soil directive and the soil strategy and so on. It always was difficult to come further, amongst others, because countries like Germany didn't like the subsidiarity thing, meaning that there's a lot of national competences around that, competences from member states, and they don't want the EU level to look at that. But aside, as I said, there's still a lot of science to be needed. I mean, how are you going to have an information on the microplastics presence of microplastics in soils everywhere in Europe? How are you going to organize that? Which kind of sampling methodology would you need to develop there? I mean, it's monstrous. It's enormous.
Okay.
But yes, for all sake, yes. I mean, it's nothing that I want to discourage. On the contrary, there's lots of more research needed and ideas on how this could be done. And we are aware that microplastics in soil is a huge problem. But give us good ideas.
Yeah. There's another question here.
Yes, hello. My name is Christian Engel. I'm working at the representation of the German region North Rhine-Westphalia here in Brussels. I wasn't really going to ask that, but I was a bit surprised that in your presentation you actually did not mention the soil strategy and the intention. I mean, that was announced by the Commission to publish a new soil health law, at least a proposal, which I think is due to come out in June, if I understand. And yes, looking back at the discussions we had like 15 years ago, which was difficult, and Germany was not really one of the countries, as you said, that loved the idea at that time. I think our position has really changed by now, and you know about that. But as far as I understand, I mean, the approach would be different, but at least there would be some elements like monitoring obligations for member states, including monitoring on microplastics in soils. So I was wondering whether you could comment on that.
No. No, I mean, you have to forgive me, but it's impossible to know all the pieces of legislations that come out. And if there are monitoring obligations on microplastics, it will come to my desk, and it has not come to my desk yet. Might be bad, but tell me, think about it. I don't think we need to have this discussion right now, how that could be done on a member states level, a monitoring obligation in soil on microplastics. Yeah. Come up with a good idea of that.
Great, yes. Europe is work in progress. It's a live situation, as they say in the media. And one of the conflicts is always between the localities, the regions, the member states, and the central level. And I think we all understand the dynamics that pull issues in one direction or the other, and how difficult it can be to arrange cooperation in a meaningful way. Thank you, Werner Bosmans, for your presentation today, the overview that you've given us.